Coming up on this episode of the Roundtable.
People forget because of how hard we've whipsawed since the smartphone. But you go back to like 2006 and you watch a lot of the movies from 2006, and it's really just kind of this incredibly uninventive, paint by numbers, basic bit, just sort of like cultural mush. And the fall of like whiteness or whatever as an identity was, I think, well underway before wokeness really took off. And that conventionalism and that just kind of the spark had started to go out. People had really already lost touch with their traditions. A lot of people couldn't even like say anything about their grandparents except maybe their names and what they smelled like or whatever. And the reaction against that is something that we see now every day on the internet, whether it's coming from, Groiperville or coming from Wokeville. And there is this like very deep seated yearning among people, especially young people whose inheritance appears to be nothing in so many respects, a deep yearning to relate in some profound way with those who came before them. And when all of that just kind of leaches away into, consumerism and GDP and the rules-based international order, it's not surprising to see this kind of backlash, whether it's coded or whether it's coming from the quote unquote far right or the quote unquote far left. And this is a challenge for America.
Hello, and welcome once again to the Roundtable, your weekly publishers and editors podcast here at The American Mind. I'm your host, Spencer Clavin, features editor of The American Mind and associate editor of the Claremont Review of Books. I am joined this week by the full crew, the Rogues Gallery, managing editor Seth Barron, editor James Poulos, and publisher and president Ryan Williams. Well, it's been my favorite kind of news week, which is to say it's been a week chock full of cockamamie shenanigans, most of them dealing with bizarre cultural quirks. If we're gonna live through times, it ought to at least be entertaining, and this week at least it is. We're gonna start with Hanukkah according to Doug Emhoff. This is Kamala Harris's husband, for those of you that aren't aware, and some context before we leap into this banger of a tweet that Emhoff put out with him and Kamala lighting a menorah. This guy is, in fact, Jewish, from what I gather, although his shul credentials are about to be up for scrutiny. We'll see how much attention he paid at his bar mitzvah training. When this guy put out this tweet describing the history of Hanukkah and the story behind the festival, which is going on right now, I think, until the 15th, my first reaction is, that's hilarious. My second reaction was, oh no, now I know I'm going to have to talk about this on the roundtable, and wouldn't it be super embarrassing if, in correcting Doug Emhoff's garbled version of the Hanukkah story, I tell some incredibly garbled version of the Hanukkah story? So I frantically scrubbed through Wikipedia to make sure I remembered what was going on. But on the other hand, I didn't volunteer to launch into a whole story about Hanukkah as a kind of solidarity virtue signal, I guess, as a way of sort of mentioning or nodding toward the very real and atrocious anti-Semitism among the Democrats. Like, this is some way of, I guess, being like, I'm not one of those or whatever. But all of that having been said, according to this tweet, Hanukkah is about a time when Jewish people had to be in hiding because they were persecuted and they had to keep using their or performing their rituals in secret and remaining dedicated to the regular forms of worship and so forth. And this is why Hanukkah means dedication. About the only thing that's accurate in that tweet, and it is only half accurate, is that Hanukkah does mean dedication, but not that kind of dedication. It doesn't mean like determination. It means dedicating the temple, which is what the festival is actually about. This is an ancient story of the Maccabees in 164 BC. Judea was under occupation by the Seleucids, who are one of the many innumerable Hellenistic kingdoms. They took over from the Ptolemies, who in turn took control after Alexander the Great died. This is this period when like everybody's just fighting over every kind of territory. And for a while, the Seleucids were sort of friendly toward the Jews, allowed them to continue their worship. Then suddenly, with the accession of Antiochus IV to the throne, there was this total crackdown, and Antiochus demanded that everybody worship Zeus and that the temple be shut down and that Jewish worship be stopped. And Hanukkah commemorates the armed rebellion, the uprising against Antiochus, initiated by Matityahu and his 5 sons, one of whom, Judah, was named or referred to as the Hammer, Yehuda ha-Maccabi. And so people think this is where the Maccabees comes from, is the hammer, which is a pretty badass way of taking back your faith. Then they reconsecrated the temple, which involved the lighting of lamps, which is why Hanukkah is also called Chag Urim, the festival of lights. But they only had enough oil to last for one day, and this is where there was a miracle because the oil burned for 8 crazy nights, which is a phrase from the Torah. Okay, that part's a joke, but I, I think I got everything right there. And if I didn't know any of that and I wanted to do a Hanukkah tweet, like it seems like a big self-own to just launch into this totally false explanation. Like, can't you just be like, I don't really know what this festival's about, but it's very nice and we stand with Jewish people? I guess you can't if you're Doug Emhoff because you're supposed to be Jewish. But what do you guys think about this entire debacle?
Well, I mean, it really cracked me up because, well, it's not just that they got it wrong, but the way in which they got it wrong. I mean, I'm assuming Doug Emhoff himself didn't post this tweet, and one of Kamala Harris's staff did. But I mean, it wouldn't have been that hard to look up exactly what the story is. But what's funny is the way in which everything pertaining to the discussion of current events kind of has to be cast in this way. Now, in which the Jews and Israel are like weak and huddling in like a basement somewhere.
Hmm.
I think the problem with the story as it I mean, the thing is Hanukkah is actually, I mean, despite what the uh anti-Zionist Jews would say, um Judaism really is pretty Zionist. I mean, it's hard to it's kind of hard to escape the um the association of the religion with the desire to return to Israel. And Hanukkah in particular is, pretty damn Zionist. I mean, it's all about recapturing the temple, reconsecrating the temple, a couple hundred years before Jesus. So this is, just firmly in the whole temple period. Uh but it's funny because the Democrats, obviously they're walking a fine line here politically, and they can't really come out and say Hanukkah is a great celebration of Jewish power, the eternal ownership of Jerusalem
The
by the
vigorous
Jews.
birthright of the Jews to this
Yeah,
domain.
right.
Yeah.
So they kind of have to like cast it in this sort of, I don't know, sentimental, sort of Holocaustoid terms, like retrojecting the Holocaust, or like, the Warsaw Ghetto into second century BCE, Judea. So the whole thing seemed just rich, just rich with irony. Um, and also it was weird because I believe that tweet was on like the third night of Hanukkah, but they're only lighting like the one candle. It's hard to figure out exactly what they're doing. So I just really enjoyed everything about this. During those 8 days in hiding, they recited their prayers and continued their traditions. It's just completely. I mean, it wasn't 8 days of hiding. It was 8 days of like triumph.
Of celebration. It's like they lifted a paragraph from like Number the Stars or something, some like
Yeah.
Holocaust memoir.
So I don't know. I just thought it was very interesting, and it's you know, I mean, look, part of the way the IDF and Israel is playing the war that's going on is of like, Hamas is Nazis and the Jews are victims. So look, this is a familiar kind of myth or way of talking about Israel, like little Israel. I mean, but it's a pretty major military power regionally. But there's a certain discomfort in talking about it in those terms. So, and look, this cuts both ways. In certain ways it does, it's vulnerable, but there's something a little mendacious about pretending like that the country is about to be wiped out by Hamas. I mean, that's probably not going to happen. So anyway, it's just a funny. It's the whole thing is kind of funny.
Seth stole all my best lines, I think,
Mm.
especially the which is fine.
Well, I didn't know you had lines.
No, that's all right, Seth. The only last off-color joke I have about it is it's like Emhoff put the Maccabees in the attic with Anne Frank as she was hiding.
Right.
The Holocaustization is correct, Seth, and it's yeah, he's casting it back in time. I would just say also it makes maybe Emhoff did draft it, and in that sense, it makes him and Kamala a good, well-paired couple because they both have what seems to be a boundless capacity for PR faux pas. Yeah, I don't really have anything to add. The thing is, it's just so amusing and so perfect coming from that couple. It's a combination of incompetence, historical ignorance, and just PR idiocy. And so
It
there it
reminded
is.
me of like that TV show Drunk History.
Yeah, you were
So the
texting me-
Maccabees, right? Yeah.
Yeah, you were texting me, Seth, about my favorite TV show, Kunk on Earth and Kunk on Britain, which is just some like British comedian that is an idiot and going around pretending to do a BBC show. I have something to add, which builds not just on what Seth said, but what you write for us from time to time on the site, Seth. I wonder whether assimilating every Jewish tradition, story, idea to the Holocaust is a way of attempting to position Jews and Judaism on the right side of the oppressor oppressed divide. So it's become clear that a la sort of Franz Fanon, and before him, indeed, Vladimir Lenin, the woke or Marxist way of dividing up the world is between the strong and the weak are always right and justified in everything, and the strong are always deserving of total annihilation. And so now that it's become clear that Jews are kind of being shunted into the white heteropatriarchal oppressor category, and anything that Hamas or the Palestinians do against them is okay, it becomes very useful and advantageous to refer to the real truth that in fact Jews are like the most maligned and oppressed people in all of history, and indeed the most inspiring sort of resistors against that oppression, but not so useful to then also acknowledge that the Jews have a history of strength, armed resistance, all that stuff. Like, it's totally inconvenient to realize that actually there's this incredible story about like rising up and going to war. My dad always talks about when he was a kid, like hating the idea that as a Jewish person, he was supposed to identify exclusively with cringing victims and not with like Sandy Koufax and cool, kind of studly people. And this is sort of like an extreme version of that, it seems like.
Well, I don't know if it's pumpkin spice, but in the interest of adding some spiciness
Hmm.
to this segment, I will try to say something controversial, which is, beyond the laugh hilarity value of watching the second man, is that second gentleman,
Second
is that
gentleman, yeah.
all that? Yeah, just kind of bungle his way through this history. This is kind of like the epitome of the soft woke liberal trying to perform like something that's woke enough to satisfy the wokies, but like conventional enough and normy enough to satisfy the establishment, and kind of ending up satisfying neither. And I think that tension is going to just continue to be exacerbated over the years and perhaps the decade to come, when you look at like the psychology of wokeness and like why is this so important to so many people. I think a lot of the answer has to do with what Doug Emhoff done, which is evince an incredibly like thin and foolish and vacuous and cringy and self-unaware version of what he purports to be his own tradition and history and identity and so forth. Uh, every country, every civilization state has its own like version of the political theological problem. And it seems like, at least so far in the United States, there's been a kind of structural pressure to push uh, the majority demographic in America toward some kind of like whack syncretism, where it's like, well, it's not really Judaism and it's not really Christianity. It's kind of civil religion. And no, we haven't read the Bible and we kind of forgot the stories and we don't always go to church. And it's really more of a cultural thing. And after all, it's Christmas is just about like trying to survive your relatives one day out of the, like it all just kind of becomes this lumpen white mushiness. And people forget because of how hard we've whipsawed since the smartphone. But you go back to like 2006 and you watch a lot of the movies from 2006, and it's really just kind of this incredibly uninventive, paint by numbers, basic bit, just sort of like cultural mush. And the fall of like whiteness or whatever as an identity was, I think, well underway before wokeness really took off. And that conventionalism and that just kind of the spark had started to go out. People had really already lost touch with their traditions. A lot of people couldn't even like say anything about their grandparents except maybe their names and what they smelled like or whatever. And the reaction against that is something that we see now every day on the internet, whether it's coming from, Groiperville or coming from Wokeville. And there is this like very deep seated yearning among people, especially young people whose inheritance appears to be nothing in so many respects, a deep yearning to relate in some profound way with those who came before them. And when all of that just kind of leaches away into, consumerism and GDP and the rules-based international order, it's not surprising to see this kind of backlash, whether it's coded or whether it's coming from the quote unquote far right or the quote unquote far left. And this is a challenge for America. This is a challenge that's been exacerbated by the internet, but I think it runs, deeper than that. We can't just blame it all on our technology. And it's very easy and even quite satisfying to laugh at Doug Emhoff today. But tomorrow, more of us may find ourselves presented with this kind of fork in the road, where it's like, well, if the Walmart version of Western civilization is like no longer has the stickiness and the purposiveness to hold the country together, then well, it's going to be try to create a new civilization under the flag of infinite rainbow stripes, or it's going to be a recourse to something that is much fuller and more robust and more comprehensive in its lived experience, as they like to say on the left, than the kind of whack syncretism that a lot of people, I think, have gradually drifted toward over the past 50 years.
I was looking up as you were talking, James. I literally Googled what year did The Holiday come out? 2006.
QED.
Yeah, exactly. We rest our case. Okay, nice. This is actually a very good, I think, transition, especially with the movies, into our next, also sort of spicy cultural item, and that is this movie, Civil War, for which the trailer dropped just recently. This movie is being made by the studio A24, once kind of an obscure indie studio, now getting more and more well known, especially because they're the guys that made Everything Everywhere All at Once, won Oscar for Best Picture. More recently, Dream Scenario, Past Lives. If you've seen or heard of either of those, I watched Past Lives on a plane. It was okay. The pauses between the lines were too long, but I digress. Alex Garland is writer director here. He of 28 Days Later and Never Let Me Go. And it looks from the trailer as if the plot of this movie is that civil war breaks out in America between quote unquote Western America, which is Texas and California, and the rest of the country led by three-term president Nick Offerman. Definitely seems like we, the audience, are supposed to be on the side of Western America. I can think of no other reason for Texas and California to be the two seceding states than that this is some kind of immigrant revolt. So people online are definitely sharing this in a kind of right-coded way. Like they genuinely want us to be at war with each other, and they want it to be a sort of subaltern rump state that overthrows the evil power of the imperialist Western devil. This impression is strengthened by the fact that this movie involves not only Nick Offerman but also Jesse Plemons, the two of whom have kind of been anointed, I've noticed, in Hollywood as like White Devil Senior and White Devil Junior. Nick Offerman was in Parks and Rec as the curmudgeonly but ultimately beloved extreme libertarian that was in there. It seemed he was supposed to be the villain, but then everybody actually kind of agreed with him. Since then, he's played like the gay survivalist in that movie or that video game TV show about zombies, The Last of Us. But he has this sort of like, screw you dad energy, which seems to be on full display here as he plays the president. And then Jesse Plemons is like, if you remember from the last few seasons of Breaking Bad, he's the hillbilly looking, sinister, slightly inbred seeming, but still handsome guy that represents everything that we're supposed to hate about Appalachia. So all of this is, I'm just doing like a close read of the trailer here. You guys can tell me if I'm way off base, but one question that was raised by our sort of mutual friend, Charles Haywood, was, is this actually some kind of sinister coded message, or is this just a movie that happens to be getting made at this very fractious time? Or, can we have both, a la The Gift?
Speaking as someone who watched the trailer
an authority, that is, an expert in this
and
film.
am now reading the Wikipedia page, which doesn't really say anything about the plot. So there's a lot to be read into this. I couldn't even figure out which side one is supposed to be on, what the stakes are in this civil war. Clearly, I guess, yeah, one side is supposed to be kind of, I don't know, Trumpy, Christian nationalist, fascist, and the other side, I suppose, is supposed to be very like, pride friendly, I guess. I don't really know. Yeah, it seems, look, it's obviously like whatever their version of clickbait is. Um, right. Jesse Plemons and Nick Offerman are like flaming liberals in real life, and they're always making these kinds of productions or putting themselves. There's a bunch of these actors who are sort of stark featured, who, for whatever reason, like you sort of described there, Spencer, are anointed as like authentic representations of white masculinity, white American masculinity, whose job is to debunk it and demonstrate why it's just so evil. And it kind of seems like that's what's going on in this. I, you know, I don't know. It seems, if you want to be sort of conspiratorial about it, they're trying to put Trump in prison. Uh, the government is going after anybody it doesn't like or who doesn't like it, which is basically the same thing. And they're gearing up for like a really crazy 2024. So this movie, it probably ultimately should be scored as a campaign finance contribution to the Democratic National Committee. But I don't know. I mean, it seems a little worrisome.
I did not see the trailer. I did see a viral video of a brawl on the 110 South Freeway in downtown Los Angeles, pitting Hamas protesters against irate motorists who did not like the idea of being stuck on the 110 South, not just in the metaphorical sense, but in the literal sense. And to me, the viral video seems more realistic portrayal of civil war in America than whatever it is that Alex Garland is doing. He was notoriously, back in the primordial era, the author of The Beach, a film which was intended to be a kind of comeback vehicle for Leonardo DiCaprio. And I mention this because those who have spent enough time in Hollywood will learn, especially if they are trying to break into Hollywood, that the televisual medium is based around certain formulae, and one of the most important is the formula that pertains to dramatic plotting in a TV series or a motion picture.
Is this Save the
And
Cat, James?
yes,
Yeah,
Save
yeah.
the Cat. Now, I've read Save the Cat, and I will tell you, there was a time about, I don't know, I guess it must have been 10 years ago at this point, where I started to hear really frightening things about Save the Cat, specifically that script readers were now beginning to reject scripts on the basis of their failure to hit certain beats by certain specific page numbers in a
A
script.
real thing. A real thing.
Yes. And
Yeah.
that struck me as so fundamentally inimical to art itself that I put dramatically less of my time and effort, and indeed my hopes and dreams, into writing for the screen as opposed to writing in the good old fashioned way for the page. The reality, however, to its credit, Save the Cat is really not intended to be a proto AI that turns every last drop of human presence into a numerical figure. Save the Cat's actually quite flexible, and in the same way that like a sonnet is oftentimes very good because of the structure that it must work with instead of in spite of that structure. Something similar with Save the Cat. So, with that caveat aside, and I promise there is a point to this story. Nevertheless, if your movie does not avail itself of the fundamental, like primitive rules of dramatic structure, it will pretty much not do well. People will shy away from it. The word of mouth will be bad. I myself saw Dream Scenario just, I think, days, not weeks ago, and very impressive in some ways, and just couldn't deliver in others. And part of the reason why it just couldn't deliver in some of those ways, despite, to its credit, wading into like cancel culture and some other stuff in a sort of like fun but serious and rather rewarding way for a film. Nevertheless, there are just some structural issues. And so when someone like Alex Garland, who I think really got smacked hard because the film was so poorly received in many quarters. He kind of, figured out how to make movies that just worked in a propulsive way, plot wise, and, gave audiences something that they could get immersed in, get your sort of entertainment rocks off, get out and feel good about the experience. Um, this film, Civil War, is either going to adhere to the basic rules of movie structure and probably for that reason cause people to see it, or it is going to veer away from those rules and probably be mush and result in some bad Rotten Tomatoes ratings. One way or the other, even if it does adhere to those rules, and even if it is a very good movie, it is therefore almost guaranteed to not be a very good reflection of the reality of the situation in America right now. And people who, I really think that Star Wars has done a number on many, many Americans, generations of Americans. They really, as a result of Star Wars, started thinking of real life in terms of the grand mythical themes of Star Wars. And I don't think that's going to happen with Civil War. I think to the contrary, if it works as a movie, it's going to seem like really fantasy that's disconnected from reality. And if it fails as a movie, it's probably not going to be because it's like the viral video of the brawl on the 110 South. It's probably just going to fail because it just doesn't hang together dramatically very well. So people should, not look to this film with the hope or the expectation of seeing their hopes and fears about an American Civil War kind of apotheosized into like some eternal work of art. I think one way or the other, it's probably going to be quite the contrary.
If you really want to annoy people and become a pariah in your social circles, two things you can do are one, read Save the Cat, and then predict the outcome and the ending of every movie, especially every major blockbuster that you go to, while your friends insist that no, these are all totally original plots, and you're like, well, now we're going to have like the sort of halfway through Act 2 reversal or whatever. The other thing you can do is learn about the seminar that basically every evangelical pastor takes about the 3-point sermon, which in fact has much the same structure as Save the Cat, and which many people observe religiously. And then you will realize that many of the cherished insights that are coming forth from your dais are actually made according to a formula that is perhaps somewhat less creative than you had hoped. None of that is either here or there, but James, that's like a really interesting point. I think that civil war of the kind that some people fear and others perhaps even hope is brewing will not, in fact, be the satisfying, neat, and dramatic kind of surging act of heroism or triumph or resolution that everybody is picturing when they talk about this stuff. It will be chaotic and wild and messy and ugly and bloody, and none of the things that we're picturing of like the Rebel Alliance sort of conquering the Death Star are really at play here.
It's in a way much like the Emhoff episode, a perfect encapsulation of our times. Depending on which side of the national divide you're on, and I don't mean to imply that this divide tracks with the film's narrative. I don't think we're anywhere near the type of civil war that's depicted in the film, and thank God for that. But depending on how you look at it, it's either predictive programming if you're on the right, that is, Hollywood's trying to normalize something that they both think is going to happen and going to be brought about by dreaded right-wing America, and also will take the shape that's offered in this movie, which seems to me to be kind of discordant with how Americans view their fellow citizens, even if they're normal Americans. Not any of the not either of the right or left leading edges in our national politics, but that is just normal neighbors. Or and it's also it's a perfect encapsulation of the kind of weird mix of fantastical unreality of, I think, sort of left-wing Hollywood about the rest or a big portion of the country, as well as somebody pointed out online that it looks like the hero in the movie is the journalist, or the journalists. So someone said, read the room if you're trying to do something realistic. I think across the country, regardless of party, the press is not held in high regard. So it's it's kind of a wish casting dream of Hollywood in a way that the fearless media will somehow avert a disaster that's looming for us. While at the same time, Alex Garland likes to. He's had a little bit of press about the film, and you see it in Ex Machina too. He likes to write, he says, fiction that's sort of just a little out ahead of where we are, and thus plausible, but also dystopian and frightening at the same time. And so, yeah, it seems to me that entertainment like this, just from a public spirited point of someone like Alex Garland, is irresponsible. So that's what I would say about it. And I mean, it's like throwing a kind of live grenade down the hallway of American culture, given our divisions right now. And so I don't think it's that great of development that this movie is on the horizon. We'll see how it does.
And one more thing,
Let's
he's
hope it's
not
not a
even
blockbuster.
American.
Yes, that's right. And the production company is a British production company that's been around for the last 20 years, who's partnered. I couldn't find any evidence on this film, but has partnered in the past with some of the big bankrolling production Chinese companies. So just yet another data point in our kind of distorted and somewhat sick culture, and especially Hollywood.
I mean, one interesting feature of uh, past lives is that it takes place. I mean, this is a cleverly integrated plot device, but it takes place largely in various Asian languages. Like there's like not a lot of English in it, although there is some. And kind of reminds me weirdly in that way of The Meg, which is the first movie that I remember seeing. It's a ridiculous and terrible action movie about a giant shark that doesn't even rise to the level of being kind of stupidly fun, but it's got this major Chinese plot arc in it. And it was the first time I ever saw a movie that I was like, oh, wait, there are whole scenes in this that are not aimed at me, that are like, oh, the Chinese heroes are coming in and they're speaking fully in Chinese and I need subtitles. So doesn't seem like what's going on with this movie, but it has been kind of a feature of movies for a while that they want to play to that audience and their financial incentives and all that for that sort of thing. But yeah, I mean, if you take art seriously and culture seriously as you should, then making that claim even explicitly about, I'm portraying something that's one step over the line from where we are. That's sort of the premise of like Black Mirror and those shows as well. It's not a totally original thing to do, but it does play into it's sort of the movie version of the thing where the press is always saying like Trump is one hair's breadth away from dictatorship, or AOC being like, do you realize that on January 6th, like we could have transitioned into a military dictatorship? Like there's just an implicit kind of alarmism and hysteria inherent in making this movie and framing it that way, if indeed he wants to frame this particular movie that way. But as Seth says, there's lots we don't know about this plot yet.
And we should add too that I don't. This is the sort of big Hollywood manifestation of this, but it's not like the contemplation of civil war is the sole province of the left culturally. There's been plenty of right-wing books in recent decades, probably taking the alternative perspective with the alternative villains that sort of play out, dissolution and civil war in America.
Oh, certainly. Yeah, no, it's there's two flavors of it on right and left. I feel there's the kind of more mainstream flavor, which is, oh no, we're about to be taken over by a hostile force, be it Trump or the kind of Marxist left. And then there's the sort of wish fulfillment, like, wouldn't it be nice if we could be the rebel insurrectionists or whatever.
Like the Turner Diaries.
Yeah, like none of these particularly edifying. I mean, Man in the High Castle was a TV show that sort of did this. It made it so explicit because it was the Nazi. The premise was that the Nazis had conquered some large portion of America, so it was literally everyone I don't like is Nazis, and wouldn't it be great? But like, Handmaid's Tale is the same way. There's plenty of these, and to Ryan's point, some of this pornographic wish fulfillment it only makes its way into our consciousness on the left, because the left controls these major organs of media, and most kind of blockbuster movies and TV shows are, approach the matter from that perspective. But yeah, it's in the air. There's no question, which is itself kind of alarming. Well, from from fictional to can't make it up, I guess we should talk about Hunter Biden. It's been a while since we visited with Hunter. The occasion for our talking about him now is this speech that he made about the quote illegitimate House investigation of his various alleged misdeeds. At this point, we're talking about millions and millions of dollars in tax evasion. We're talking perhaps principally or most alarmingly about his business dealings in Ukraine and with private Chinese businessmen, which have been the subject of many, many actual lies. Now, I think we can say that on Biden's part about not having known about it, not being involved. Now it looks like, in fact, he had these sort of fake name email accounts that people are trying to get a hold of. And the investigation simply is ongoing. Here's the Hunter Biden speech now, which I hate to quote myself on Twitter, but I guess we do that sometimes on our podcast. Like, you can imagine a whole Succession episode going on behind this speech, or at least I feel like I can. Of like, you need to get out there and you need to stick this on yourself and acknowledge whatever. Because he begins by saying all of these things about, I have squandered certain opportunities, and yes, I have regrets, and I'm trying to make amends for all of my various misdeeds. Just much of which kind of playing into, I think, the line that seems to be emerging on the left about Hunter, which is that he is a poor, kind of troubled soul, and that we just need to give the Biden family its privacy as it works through the difficulties of addiction and so forth, which, nobody, least of all I, wants to cast aspersions on the difficulty of dealing with addiction, but it's kind of absurd to claim that that's what we're dealing with here. Hunter comes out and said, first and foremost, I'm a father, a son, a husband. Okay, fine, but we're dealing with matters of national security and major state concerns. Anyway, I'm wondering what you guys think about why this speech is happening now, and what, if anything, it will do, or whether this is really just kind of a blip.
Well, I mean, hasn't he also been indicted by a federal court in California, or was that a state court for tax evasion? I mean, he's clearly facing major investigations. I want to know. So he did not appear before Congress? Shouldn't he go to jail now? I thought that was the new way it works, is if you don't obey Congress, then you get tried for contempt of Congress and go to
Yeah.
prison.
He appeared. He said, I'm here to do what I said I would do, which is appear before a public committee, but the committee wasn't going to be public, so thus he did not testify.
Okay.
I think.
Yeah. Okay. That sounds right.
Yeah.
I mean, but you're totally right, Spencer. This is the line that he's like this suffering soul. But this was the line even before the election, when the New Yorker ran that article talking about how Hunter Biden would go and live in a tent with a woman named Bicycle in Skid Row and do crack and meth all night. This is, they've been trying to inoculate this whole side of him for a long time. But it's not really like it's a side of him. It just seems like it's him. And then, the drugs aside, just the criminality, the work on behalf of foreign powers. And I don't know if you saw last week when the New York Post reporter happened to be the guy doing the White House correspondent's like pool. And he asked Biden, he said, it seems like you lied about your son's businesses. And Biden just got this like, his face just closed down, and he was like, it's all lies. It's lies. It's all lies. Yeah, it is sort of like something out of Succession or some other kind of, or, Succession might be a little too grandiose, because the Biden family just strikes me as like, I don't know, like some kind of much lower, like, I don't know, like a family in Scranton that owns that has the karting and refuse franchise and just defends it in as bloody and gross ways as possible. I mean, they seem really, brutal is and crude is how I see it. Just calling everything lies when it's obviously not a lie. I mean, it seems pretty clear as day that he's getting money, that they're dividing money up and sending it to like grandnieces and people who obviously had nothing to do with whatever the ostensive business is. Like nobody explains, well, what is their product? Why is
That's
the
a
whole
great point.
family, including Biden's brothers and sisters, they're all involved in just influence peddling for decades?
Yeah,
I
what
mean,
on
it's
earth are
bizarre.
they supposed to be doing? Nobody has ever explained that to me, to
Right.
my satisfaction.
Yeah, no, exactly. Um, so, it's not so this is like this kind of self-pitying attitude, it's Biden pere fee. This is like the like Joe Biden talks this way, and I guess Hunter Biden talks this way. Um, but everybody seems to accept it, so I'm not even sure it's going to affect anything.
Yeah, I wonder if it'll affect anything one way or another. This is one of those issues in which it seems that the public has kind of dug in its heels. Whether they think this is absurd or whether they think it's poor pitiable. Hunter Biden, he talked in this speech like there were portions where he sounded like a kind of princeling that had been wronged. That they showed nude photographs of me in an inquiry, which, like, if your nude photographs are verging on compromising state secrets or whatever, that this sort of seems reasonable. But it's like, as always with this stuff, you know, the Bidens are this. You're right, Seth. Like, kind of preposterous and wart encrusted, corrupt, oligarchic family, and the thing that's supposed to be evil is sort of paying attention to that or talking about it. Whereas, of course, hypocrisy is a lame thing to point out, but like this is also in the reverse instance, it's always the actual misdeed that gets attacked. If it's Trump or whatever. Um, but yeah, I sort of wonder. There's talk about whether this is going to be a big issue that Trump can really hit on, or whoever the nominee is can really hit on with any success in 2024. I am not so sure that 2024 isn't going to be a more kind of cathartic and indeed chthonic, atavistic contest than one in which people make claims and evaluate them and decide who they're going to vote for. But maybe that's too pessimistic. I don't know. I mean, it just seems as if this is not the sort of thing that makes a dent.
Well, I mean, the part of the occasion for Hunter coming, of course, is coming to DC. That is this ongoing investigation by Representative Comer and others, Judiciary Committee, that announced today that they're, I think, well, maybe didn't announce today, but had this short video today, about 5 minutes or so, sort of laying out what their impeachment inquiry is going to take up in pretty concise, straightforward manner, which is to say, there looks to be a lot of smoke and we're looking for the fire. I mean, there's a lot of money passing around the Biden family, including, a $200,000 check and a $40,000 check to Joe Biden from, I think, his brother, with just loan repayment in the subject line. Meanwhile, you have, I mean, everyone knows all these facts. We've been talking about it for years. Hunter sitting on a board that he really wasn't qualified to sit on in one of the most corrupt parts of Greater Europe, or Greater Eurasia, frankly, getting paid lavishly. And then all these details are coming out about his pretty extravagant lifestyle, which he referenced and said, I was very irresponsible during my struggle with addiction, spending at one point, I think in 1 year, close to $1 million on prostitutes. Or no, not quite that much. That's more like $300,000 or $400,000 on prostitutes in 1 year. So, it's there's a lot of smoky corruption going on around that family. And anyone who's watched, this was part of what was so infuriating to me about some of the never Trump arguments against Trump and in favor of Biden from Bill Kristol and others, which is to say, finally we have someone decent and honest. That's why I'm voting for a Democrat this time over Trump, and even though I normally wouldn't. And anyone who's paid any attention to Biden's career over 3 decades knows that he's always been an inveterate liar, a plagiarist, among other things. So it's just the whole thing is just sort of an insult to the public's intelligence. Hunter's press conference, Biden's, self-righteous denials. So there, there's something there. The question is, can Congress really get to the bottom of it? And they've made a lot of headway. I mean, just the simple fact alone that I think there's something like 20 different entities that process payments around Hunter and the Biden family. No direct link to Joe yet that anyone can find, but
Oh, I have
you know,
28.
yeah, it's like you have a
Disguised.
bunch of elaborate pass-through vehicles for money from foreign governments, from China to Ukraine. I mean, come on, how stupid do you think we are?
I personally am very stupid, but that's a separate issue. Okay, yeah, I think it sounds like we're reaching a bit of a consensus here. There needs to be a word now for things that are shocking, surprising but not shocking, or rather shocking but not surprising, because it seems as if there are many things that we discuss kind of regularly on the podcast that are appalling and that in another context, in a better time, would be cause for alarm or surprise, but are nevertheless not, in fact, surprising. And we shouldn't, in fact, be surprised at them because we ought to get over our surprise and think about what to do and how to proceed. With that, it's time for us to remind you all to read the damn site. We run a website. It's called AmericanMind.org, and you can go there to find not just our commentary, but the incisive analysis of a whole range of authors. So we just want to recommend a few pieces, as we always do every week, that we think you might particularly enjoy. Although, if I say so, everything on there is great. Okay, so my choice is called Our Borders Back in Europe. It's by Todd Bensman, who's got a new book out reviewed actually in the latest CRB. So you should go also read Jeremy Carl's review of Bensman's book, Overrun. I'm hearing great things about it. Looking forward to reading it myself. But this piece is just, I think, really rich, detailed, and informative in kind of a grim way. It's part of a feature we are running on immigration in America and Europe. So Europe as a potential horror story about the future of America, America as the sort of unattended, ongoing, rolling crisis, comparisons that can and can't be drawn, both in terms of policy and in terms of the actual situation on the ground. So Bensman, as they say online, understood the assignment. He's currently in the Balkans, or at least he was when he wrote this, and he's looking, tracing this route that a lot of immigrants take through the Eastern European states, Croatia, Bosnia, and so forth. And he's making the case based on his own personal firsthand reporting, but also detailed research, that a lot of these people are definitionally and in some cases avowedly not fleeing the horrifying circumstances that we are invited to imagine, but rather doing economic migration or even a kind of cultural migration. He opens with a story of a guy that says, Taliban good, they are good Muslim people, I am Muslim. He's making his way through Camp Lipa in northwestern Bosnia. This leads Bensman into consideration of the right-wing policies and or populist movements that we've talked about a little bit on this show that are popping up across Europe. What might be successful or might be stymied in the EU's efforts to staunch this spread, and how American politicians could potentially imitate, although there are some difficulties there as well. Anyway, it's just a really fine essay, and it is well worth your time. It won't take that long. Our Borders Back in Europe by Todd Bensman. Seth, what do you got?
I liked a piece that we ran today, Wednesday, by Alexander Riley, called Black Privilege at Harvard, looking at Harvard President Claudine Gay and the claims of plagiarism that have been leveled against her, and more significantly, the blithe manner in which Harvard had clearly already investigated this, not bothered to mention it, and then just dismissed it, with dozens or hundreds of Harvard faculty signing on to say, no, this this doesn't matter. This is irrelevant. Who cares? And I mean, he goes through pretty specifically and shows, that she did indeed, at least by the strict standards of plagiarism, plagiarize over the course of decades. But also the fact that she kind of has a thin record of publication. She doesn't have like a tremendous amount of scholarship behind her. Her performance before Congress last week, all she and her colleagues, or her her co-presidents, they all did a pretty terrible job. Just, assuming that your job as college president is to not be an embarrassment, and to, answer questions without sounding like you're just in a deposition. Um, Anyway, so it's a pretty good piece, and it raises the question, like, well, what exactly are future Harvard students to think, uh, if they decide to plagiarize? How are they going to treat plagiarism in the future at Harvard if the president is herself a well-established plagiarist? So it was a good piece. Black privilege at Harvard.
I personally would like to nominate ChatGPT for the next president of Harvard, since that does seem like where the whole thing is headed. I'm sure James will tell me that that's in fact, some version of that is in fact on the horizon. James, what have you got?
Well, you have tempted me to just continue the discussion of the piece at hand. And I think I might just exercise the editor's prerogative and do exactly that. Because it is true that President Gay is not, let's say, particularly distinguished for doing much of anything except embodying, representing the kind of identitarian equilibrium for which the academic Borg is trying to solve. And sure enough, she has not been fired. She has not resigned. Campus has closed ranks around her. And it will be very interesting because, as you said, there is this looming issue of technology. And gosh, what am I sending Pumpkin to Harvard to become anyway? Is Pumpkin going to be obsolete by the time Pumpkin graduates? And what is to become of us all? It's been a sort of stock in trade for the Ivies to sell themselves to successful American parents as the golden ticket, the golden meal ticket for their children. And that is now under a cloud. And partly it's under a cloud because of technology, but partly it's under a cloud because the mask has really come off as far as DEI and all that is concerned. The backlash is real. It has been real. It is getting realer. Scalps are being claimed. There is a sort of recognition in corporate America that maybe this has all gone a little bit too far. And the logic of wax syncretism and consumerism for all is beginning to reassert itself and is sort of starting to find its voice again against wokeness. Which, after all, purports to be the spiritual authority necessary to ensure that the robots do not take over and control us all. How will parents respond to that? That is an interesting question. The gender gap between males and females on campus is growing. The ideological gap, the culture war gap between high school age boys and girls is widening. And for the sake of recommending another piece on the site, Joel Kotkin gets into some of this with his Multiculti Reckoning piece. The subhead is "The Democrats' appeal to racial resentment is wearing thin," and that seems to be more than just rhetoric. There do seem to be all kinds of indicators, whether it's like Black support for Donald Trump or sort of how many Proud Boys are actually not who white themselves, but are of some other heritage or skin color. It is sort of beginning to show some wear and tear. The DEI ESG complex, and the worse the economy gets, the more difficult it is for these elites to rebrand themselves in any way that is going to look authoritative and is going to attract new talent. So between Kotkin and Riley here, I think a nice 1-2 punch for readers who want to track this stuff and who are maybe not quite ready to break out the popcorn yet, but certainly it's heartening to see that at least when it comes to the incredible almost worship that has been lavished at the feet of higher education, the worship of smarts, the worship of credentials, the worship of uh, the ability to manipulate symbols and turn them into money. All of that is now clearly in danger, and I think the fundamental questions people are starting to ask about, the future of college, the future of higher education, the purpose of education. It's not looking so simple as like, well, we'll just make sure that like whites don't make up too much of the population and make sure that grievances get aired, and that's kind of the soft wokeness that has driven so much of the elite establishment here, is proving not enough for the hard wokies, and too much for those who are just turned off by the whole thing.
Would that it were so simple. Thanks, James. Ryan, what do you got?
Speaking of higher education, I wanted to highlight a piece by someone who leads an organization that for a long time has been dedicated to bolstering and assisting the brighter spots of higher education scattered around the country in individual departments and groups of students, et cetera. That is the young Johnny Burtka, who runs ISI, the Intercollegiate Studies Institute. And he has a piece for us called American Statesman. He's kind of previewing, in a way, I think probably the introductory essay to this new collection of great statesmen and thinkers in the kind of Mirror of Princes tradition, which is to say, to be self-critical of your own regime and of your own leadership tendencies, that is, your regime's leadership tendencies, in an effort to reform and revitalize what often become kind of corrupt and backsliding political enterprises. So he has this piece called American Statesman, the subhead of which is Great Nations Need and Deserve Great Leadership. I would encourage everyone to go pick up John Burtka's book, and it's available at Amazon. And Johnny's he's part of the new right just generationally. I won't speak for him ideologically, although he's a former Claremont Institute Lincoln Fellow. Young guy, I think Johnny's maybe 35 and running this venerable institution and doing great things with it. So you can get a flavor for Johnny's thinking about America and get some good insights on his take on modern America and how we can reform it, drawing upon some of the great sources of Western civilization, from Aquinas to Machiavelli to Cicero to Al-Farabi. It's an eclectic list. So go check out the article and go buy Johnny's book.
Very nice. Okay. With that, we've run out of time, and so we have to bid you all farewell.
I will tease, though, Spencer, that for the next few weeks, I think maybe we have some fun clips from my son doing a fake podcast. They're short clips, and they'll be at the very end of some of these episodes. I find them charming. I'm biased, of course, but I think everyone will get a kick out of it.
Yes. No, they're very charming, and they're going to be excellent post-credit scenes for us for a while. So stick around to make sure you hear that. Don't drop off just because I'm about to go into my weekly spiel, which is to thank you very much for listening to the Roundtable. And if you want to know more about everything we do at Claremont, not only can you go to AmericanMind.org, but you can also check out our sister publication. Just put up a new issue at ClaremontReviewOfBooks.com. You can sign up and subscribe to get the physical version, which, come on, you just got to read magazines. They're still the best. Go check that out. And also, if you would like to donate to support us, go to claremont.org/donate. We enormously appreciate, especially this time of year, the giving season. We're just very grateful for anything you can kick our way. It helps us keep the lights on and keep making podcasts. Another thing that helps us keep making podcasts and get them out to the rest of the world is if you rate us 5 stars on whatever platform you're currently listening on. That really helps boost us in the algorithm. At the very least, you could do us the courtesy of keeping whatever criticisms and bad opinions you may have to yourself. But if you like the show, do share it, post it on social media, drop it in the group chat, talk about it at Christmas dinner, however you want to communicate, whether analog or digitally. We would love your support in that way as well. Thanks to our production and engineering crew, Jake Gannon and Logan Sepieri, and thanks very much to you all for listening. We will talk to you next week.
Today is a special day. Today is Hanukkah. So get back here now because it's Hanukkah. Open your presents, be good, and stay and open your presents. Concert podcast over.